Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been a fascinating few hours. I have certainly learned a lot about ESG and about investment insights as well. It's wonderful to be here. I know things are bleak, right? Like, it's not difficult to know that things are really not happy in South Africa and around the world if you look at the news agenda. I mean, there's a 22 million rand flagpole that we might be getting. We're still looking for the decouplets, right? How are you all feeling about the news cycle in South Africa right now? Be brave, come on. Sorry? Grim. Things are grim, right? It's like things are feeling pretty bleak. Is there any optimism out there, any hope about the situation? Come on, nothing. Okay, so look, I appreciate that things are difficult. You know, sometimes things happen in South Africa that make us proud to be South African. We're encouraged. Banyana won last night. They went to the AFCON final. You know, sometimes there are things that make us distressed. Sometimes we just get plain angry, right? Like load shedding stage 6 tends to make us plain angry. I filled up my car yesterday. It cost me 2,000 rand to fill up my car. That's more than what some people are getting for social grants, right? So things certainly do make us angry. And there are a lot of things that make us angry in South Africa. But the whole world is crazy right now. Just look at the UK. I mean, they're experiencing what is a regular Limpopo summer. You know, so, you know, they kept kids at home yesterday. They didn't send them to school in the UK because they were so hot. I was like, I grew up in Limpopo. That's what it was like every single day. But it does make the conversation around ESG and everything you've been talking about more apt than ever before. But just take a look. This is this week's news headlines. Things are pretty cuck, right? Like, they really are. There have been mass shootings. The refinery has been shut down. The bank's expected to hike rates. Eskom's telling us there's more load shedding. Whistleblowers aren't getting protection. Zandile Gumede still hasn't gone to jail. Like, it's not difficult to talk about how bleak things are. And this is often the prevailing narrative in South Africa. And Googs, you mentioned whether or not hope is an investment strategy in South Africa. Now, I assure you, I know how bad things are in South Africa. This is what I do for a living every single day. I speak about it on radio, I write about it, I tell everybody how bad things are. So I'm not here to be Pollyanna and to tell you that everything is wonderful in South Africa, and actually things are way better than what they are. No, I've got a really good understanding of just how grim the reality is for many South Africans. And if you look back at what happened over the July unrest, we look at the situation with the National Assembly. We still don't know why the National Assembly burnt down earlier this year. Allegedly, it was arson. Somebody's been arrested. We don't really know what's going on. And we saw at the July unrest last year just how much of a trigger that was for the country, and how that really cemented for a lot of people that negative outlook about the country, because there was so much instability, so much insecurity, where we saw government essentially failing to provide leadership. We saw law enforcement agencies failing to preempt this. We saw the security apparatus just unable to deal with it. And I think for a lot of people, this was really the catalyst of things are bad. And when you hear people having these conversations about immigration and Plan B, a lot of it was put into action because of this, right? And then you just have to look at the jobs numbers, 35% unemployment. We've been speaking about inflation. You look at poverty, how many people live below the breadline in South Africa. We've seen the spate of shootings in the last 2 weeks, which is just inexplicable. In fact, I wrote about it today in my column in News 24, the fact that we've just seen so many mass shootings happening in South Africa, and there's no intelligence to speak of to preempt it, right? So you look at all of that data, and it tells us that this is a failed state. It's easy to make that argument, and that often is the prevailing narrative. You hear these conversations around the water cooler, you hear people talking about it at a braai, how everything is broken, how nothing works, how we are on a slippery slope to becoming the next Zimbabwe. That's my personal favorite one. And it's easy for people to say this, right? Because there is a prevailing narrative that things are broken, all police officers are corrupt, no prosecutors do their jobs properly, nothing works, and everything is broken. But what often drives this for many people is the emotive side of it, right? People are very emotional about many of these things because it affects us all personally. But I find that often what happens is people don't want to look at the facts. They don't want to look at the reality of the situation. They rather are occupied by the fear and are driven by the emotion of it. But if they were willing to look at a different narrative of the country and what the reality really is for everyone in this room, they might feel differently about it. Now, firstly, you need to understand what we've been through as a country over the past decade or so. This 9 lost years that we experienced under Zuma. And you need to fully appreciate the extent of the state capture project and what happened in South Africa during the Zuma era. And only once you really get an understanding of how extensive that hollowing out, that evisceration of the state was, can you really appreciate where we are today and what we're trying to do in terms of fighting back and uncapturing the state. I mean, essentially what we saw was this family from Saharistan arriving in South Africa. Of course, they set up shop in Bedford View in Joburg, right? Which is where all the gangsters go if you want to take over the country, is you start out in Bedford View. And not many people know this about the Guptas, but they started Sahara in Bedford View. And then, of course, they stepped up. You come from Bedford View. Look at you. You're laughing, hey, Sibo? You know that's where all the gangsters come from. But then they moved to Saxonwold, and the Saxonwold Shebeen was started. And what they did was capture an entire country. And during the Zuma era, what we saw was an entire parallel state being set up. In every single state-owned entity, every law enforcement agency, we saw an evisceration. We saw good civil servants being pushed out and people coming in as part of this organized crime network. If you look at what happened with the PAN system at state security, that was effectively a shadow intelligence agency that was set up for the services of Jacob Zuma and the Gupta brothers. We saw it at Transnet, we saw it at Eskom, we saw it at Denel, we saw it at PRASA, at the NPA, at the Hawks, at Crime Intelligence. Every single organization was hollowed out and eviscerated. And you cannot fully appreciate the extent of that. You also can't put a number on it, right? So some people have tried to do this exercise of working out exactly what it cost us. The Daily Maverick put it at 1.5 trillion rand. But that doesn't count the cost to brand South Africa, to investment, to business confidence in South Africa, and subsequent to what has happened to us. So 1.5 trillion rand, and that is the extent of state capture in South Africa. And it's only through the Zondo Commission that we've finally seen the final report of the inquiry into state capture being released. And I don't know about you, if you've all read the 5,000 pages of the work of the Zondo Commission. It does make for riveting bedtime reading, but it really does give us insight into the extent of the state capture project, how orchestrated it was, how extensive it was, and the damage that was done. And I know that many people will say, oh, but what was the point? Where are the prosecutions? I do believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the fact that we had witnesses coming before the country and testifying about Brian Molefe filling the bags and the boots and the cash that was handed over, and the Saxonwold Shebeen, and we heard about the bra packs for Nomvula Mokonyane and the booze and all of it, it all came out. Everything came out at the Zondo Commission. And we were able to get a really full understanding. And in many ways, as a country, it was cathartic for us. Because the only way to remove this tumor is to get a real, proper, good look at it. And that's what happened during the Zondo Commission, is we were able to really see all of it laid bare and for everything to come out. And as a result of that, we are now starting to see the prosecutions. All of the information from the Zondo Commission, all of that evidence is now being used by the investigating directorate and will be the subject of prosecutions, right? And this makes me think often about how people have got this predominant narrative of South Africa, where they think that everybody's corrupt and everything's broken and nothing works. But that is a single story of South Africa. And often the media is guilty of perpetuating the single story. And what happens is that you also seek out information that perpetuates this. So you have a negativity bias. It's why your mother-in-law shares all that nonsense on your family WhatsApp group, right? Like during COVID, how many times did you get fake news shared by your mother-in-law on the WhatsApp group? And it's not verifiable, it's not true, but it feeds into that narrative. My mother is so guilty of this. She loves to send me any negative story about South Africa. It's like just the thing that she does. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. But she'll send it to me because it perpetuates her narrative. But the problem with a single story is that it then becomes the only story. But what if there are other narratives of South Africa? And that's why we really need to have hope in South Africa, but we also need to be able to trust the information that we are getting about South Africa and that we are sharing about South Africa as well. So every year there's this thing that comes out. It's called the Edelman Trust Barometer. This is last year's. It's just a great graphic to give you an illustration, right? Only 25% of South Africans trust most news most of the time. 60% of people globally think that journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead them. I mean, why wouldn't you trust me? You know, like, why wouldn't you trust the media about what we are telling you? So this is the reality of the situation, right? Is that people trust business leaders and civil society more than they trust the media and more than they trust government. And it's getting worse in South Africa as well. People don't trust government for obvious reasons. People don't trust the media. I have no idea why. I think it might have something to do with the decouplets and the fact that a cannon was fired into the Simonstown mountain, right? Did you hear that story about how the cannon was fired into the Simonstown mountain? It never happened. So, like, obviously, people are not going to trust the media, but they're going to trust business and they trust civil society as well. So this is this year's report. It just shows you that there is a decreased trust of government and the media, an increased trust of civil society. And that's because we have got this negativity bias. So we constantly seek out stories that entrench our negative view of the world. If somebody crosses the road, I'm not going to report about it. If something happens to that person crossing the road, it becomes news. So where do most of you get your news from? Where do you consume news? So you've all got the News 24 app, right? Adrian Basson will be thrilled to know, Naspers will be thrilled to know, that all of you just kind of go onto the News 24 app, maybe you get Business Day. The truth is, you go back to the same news sources all the time. You're not looking at different news sources. You're not necessarily challenging yourself. You're not thinking, oh, let me go listen to this community radio station, or let me go read Ground Up, or let me make sure that I'm getting a diversity of views and challenging my perceptions of the world. Instead, people tend to go to the platforms that reinforce their views of the world already. And in the media space, we talk about if it bleeds, it leads. But if it's good, it should, right? So obviously, we tend to report more about negative stuff than about positive stuff. There is a shift. It's what we call light and shade in the media. And we do try and bring in good news stories now, like during the July unrest. I don't know if you saw the story about the staff at the grocery store that threw cooking oil in front of their shops. Everyone was slipping and sliding everywhere, and they couldn't actually loot the store. You know, we do have this ability as South Africa to laugh at ourselves as well. And we do try and always find the good news stories and balance it. And this is something I feel really strongly about as being part of white monopoly capital mainstream media, is that we do like to challenge the narrative, and there are multiple narratives about South Africa. And that's why I like to speak about what I call the hope dealers. And I'm extremely passionate about this because I know that people are negative about South Africa and that things are bleak, and it's easy to fall into that trap. But there are also incredible stories to tell about South Africa and to tell about South Africans who are making a difference and who aren't just complaining and being negative, right? Firstly, the strength of civil society in South Africa is probably our main saving grace. In every single instance where there has been a failure in leadership, it has been civil society that has stepped into the breach and that has given us some leadership. And this goes back years. There are so many examples of court cases where government has failed and civil society has gone to the courts to hold government accountable. Look back to the Treatment Action Campaign on ARVs, equal education on textbooks, the Black Sash on social grants, EarthLife Africa on the nuclear project, AfriForum multiple times, CASAC, Freedom Under Law, the Helen Suzman Foundation, OUTA on e-tolls. There are so many examples. Most recently, 20 civil society organizations wrote to government around load shedding. It happens all the time, right? Where civil society provides leadership. We've seen Defend Our Democracy campaign holding power to account repeatedly. Jacob Zuma would be in power if it wasn't for the media and civil society. That is the reality of the situation. And South Africa is undeniably better off today than it was 5 years ago. A great example is the gift of the givers, right? And Imtiaz Suleiman. So I don't know if any of you saw the picture that was tweeted yesterday in Nelson Mandela Bay, which is facing its own ground zero. So the photograph was of the Water Affairs Minister, Senzo Mchunu, the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar Mabuyane, and Gift of the Givers. And Gift of the Givers, with government and all of these people who are supposed to be responsible for providing infrastructure, had installed 20 boreholes in Nelson Mandela Bay. And government tweeted the picture, like this was okay. So Gift of the Givers has put in 20 boreholes. This is a picture of them at the Helen Joseph Hospital, where there was no water for days. And then they just thought, well, we're going to take our equipment and drill a borehole. Screw the red tape, and that's exactly what they did. And Imtiaz Suleiman always says, when people say to him, oh, why don't you run for president? He says, because he can get more done outside of government than he can in government. And that's the reality, right? Is that we have such active citizenship, and there is definitely a sense now that you can get more done through civil society. There are so many stories that Imtiaz Suleiman, I did a long event with him, and we spoke for an hour about examples during COVID-19 where he was able to get ventilators from government institutions into government hospitals because government couldn't do it. So we need to be very grateful for the fact that we've got such strong civil society. We also have, believe it or not, rule of law in South Africa. I know many people say that we don't have rule of law, but all of these examples I've just given you of civil society going to the courts, it is the judiciary, it is judges that have also held power to account and that have made judgments over the past decade that have kept government in line. And I know that we saw unrest in July to an extent that we had never seen before, but if you walk outside, there's not complete anarchy all the time. There is rule of law in the extent that you can go to the courts and the courts function. I mean, Oscar Pistorius is in jail. Just think about that for a second, right? We had the National Police Commissioner going to jail. The former president went to jail, even if it was for like a day, and then he got released on medical parole. But it happened. We have rule of law. And then, of course, we have the National Prosecuting Authority. Now, again, I'm aware of the frustrations and the impatience that people have, and they would like to see prosecutions coming thicker and faster. But Shamila Batoy, when she came in as the NDPP, said that it was like fixing an aeroplane while in flight, that the house was on fire. Now, you need to understand the extent of what happened at the NPA. It was completely hollowed out. There was no capacity. And to unravel a spaghetti case like Steinhoff, you need to have capacity. So that has been a rebuilding process. And you say the prosecutions haven't come. The Guptas are in jail. In the last few weeks, we've seen a whole lot of Transnet executives appearing in courts. The prosecutions have started. The tide has turned. We haven't got convictions yet, but the prosecutions have started. And you have to be patient. It's going to come. Ace Makashule is suspended as the ANC Secretary General. He too is being prosecuted. Zandile Gumede is being prosecuted. The prosecutions take time. You need to make sure that the cases are winnable. I don't know if any of you probably wouldn't have heard it, but I've shared a link to it today, and please go and listen to Andrea Johnson, who's the investigating directorate head. She did an interview this morning with Bongani Bingwa on 702. And if that doesn't inspire confidence, I don't know what will, because she says the prosecutions have started, they believe that they've got a winnable case to extradite the Guptas, and she says she doesn't see things glass half empty. It's glass half full, and she cannot afford to fail. And I've known Andrea Johnson for 20 years since she was the prosecutor on the Salibi case, and I have confidence that the prosecutions will come, but be patient, these things take time. And then there are just good people, right? People like Advocate Thuli Madonsela, who did her job as the public protector in South Africa. She just decided, I'm not going to buckle under pressure. She authored the Secure and Comfort report about Nkandla. She authored State of Capture as well, the report. And it's because of her that we saw the Zondo Commission, and we are now seeing the prosecutions, where she just said, not on my watch. And if you want to see the difference between good people and bad people in the same position, just look at Busisiwe Mkhwebane, who this week is facing an impeachment inquiry in Parliament. And that's somebody who was in exactly the same position as Thuli Madonsela. They are just good people who are doing their jobs properly in South Africa, who don't get the recognition they deserve. Somebody like Mariette Venter, who was the acting CFO at the Limpopo municipality, the Capricorn municipality in Limpopo, who when VBS came knocking said, no, I'm not investing this municipality's money with VBS. You haven't got the required clearance from the SARB. I'm not doing it. And she faced pressure and pressure. She went on leave for a week, came back. A whole lot of money had been invested. She insisted that they get it back. She tipped off the SARB, which resulted in the investigation into VBS. And when VBS went belly up, that municipality, the Capricorn municipality, was one of the few in Limpopo that was not left completely bankrupt because of one person who did her job properly. So there are people there that are just doing their jobs properly. You say all police officers are corrupt or useless. Tell that to Sergeant Catherine Clady, who is an investigator who sent a serial rapist in Tshwane to jail for 1,055 years. She was a rape victim herself. She said, I'm going to go after this guy. She used her own time, her own money. She eventually got a solid case against him, and he was convicted and sent to jail for over 1,000 years. You know, there are people that just do their jobs properly that don't get recognition. And then we're very lucky in South Africa to have a robust fourth estate. And I have colleagues who have done the most incredible work. Just look at the Gupta leaks. You know, if it wasn't for the Gupta leaks, we wouldn't know about the extent of the Gupta empire. Mandy Rousseau, the late Mandy Rousseau, in 2006, 2007, went to Nkandla, before we knew about Nkandla and the fire pool and the amphitheater, and she looked around, saw all of this construction and thought, well, this isn't right. And she started digging, and she wrote the first story for the Mail and Guardian about Nkandla. And it was because of that that the media started hearing about it and started making noise about it. There is incredible investigative journalism in South Africa. If you just look at what happened with Digital Vibes, and that was Peter Louis Myburg. If you look at VBS and Paulie at the Amabungani as well, there are such good investigative journalism in South Africa. And I can stand up here, and Gugu and I can go on radio today, and we can say what we want, and we won't get taken out necessarily. You know, like, maybe the people that I'm mixed with, I don't know about you. You know, but this isn't Mexico. We have got freedom of speech in South Africa. We can say things without fear of any kind of accountability to us. We can speak freely. We have got that constitutionally enshrined right in South Africa, and we have an incredibly robust media as well. And then this is something that I personally am hugely passionate about. I wrote a book about whistleblowers last year. And for me, whistleblowers are the true patriots of South Africa. If you want an example of hope and inspiration, it is these individuals who have blown the whistle on state capture and systemic corruption in South Africa. They are the most incredible stories, from Themba Maseko to Bianca Goodson, Mosilo Motepo, Nkabisi Jonas, where people have just said, I'm not going to allow this to happen. I'm going to expose the rot. I'm going to put myself at risk. And it's because of these people that we are now seeing prosecutions, and we've seen everything coming out in the way that we did at the Zondo Commission. And the problem that we've got is that we need to encourage whistleblowers to come forward. The only way we can fight corruption is if whistleblowers are protected. And unfortunately, what happens is whistleblowers are pushed to the fringes of society. They are treated as pariahs. Many of them land up dead. They are unemployed and unemployable, and they are just not protected. So someone like Bianca Goodson, for example, who worked at Trillion, before she went to Trillion, she worked at Anglo. She had a very normal life. She was very happy. She said her life was very boring. She had a daughter, 4-year-old Chloe, and she went to Trillion. She was there for 3 months. She realized that this was a scam, that they were just conning Transnet and Eskom out of money. She quit the job. She took a few months. She then went to the public protector. She went to the parliamentary inquiry, and she blew the whistle, right? And because of her, we found out all about what happened with Trillion and Eskom and Transnet. And because of Mosilo Motepo, who was also a Trillion whistleblower, 695 million rand was returned to the fiscus. But Bianca Goodson is unemployed today. She has sent out 2,000 job offers. She told me this morning that she has had to move out of her house. She's moving in with her parents, and her daughter has to go live with her ex-husband. She cannot find work. She has PTSD. And it's unacceptable that we have these kind of realities for whistleblowers in South Africa, where they are not protected. And these are patriots who have done the right thing and made sure that corruption doesn't take place. So in the US, for example, they've got the False Claims Act, where whistleblowers get some kind of remuneration. They get 10 to 15% of successful whistleblowing claims. So Mosilo or Bianca technically should get 69.5 million rand. But instead, they get nothing and have to start back-a-buddy campaigns, which is just unacceptable. And then, of course, you've got a story of somebody like Babita Diakaran, who was the CFO at the Gauteng Health Department, who was shot dead in her driveway after dropping her daughter at school because she had blown the whistle on corruption in the health department in Gauteng. You know, how do you have a situation like this where somebody has done the right thing, they've spoken up, they've gone to law enforcement authorities, and she was shot dead for doing that? It has to change. The president has made a commitment that we will see a change in legislation. Zondo has made recommendations as well, and we have to change legislation in South Africa if we're going to encourage people to continue to come forward. And then there are those people who are just changing the narrative in South Africa, right? People who are just doing the things. So during the July unrest, as an example, when everything was falling apart and people were bunkering down with cans of tuna in their homes, there were those people who decided to push back, right? The taxi industry, private security companies, but then there were just regular South Africans who got together. Rebuild SA is a great example on Facebook. There were 3 women who just found each other on Facebook. They started this organization, and 10, 20,000 people joined, picked up their brooms, and started cleaning up after the July unrest. And those are great stories of people who just thought, well, how can I change the narrative? What can I do differently? Instead of just despairing and throwing my arms up and complaining, how can I make a difference? And then we know about the economy, the jobs failure in South Africa, but there's also this amazing entrepreneurial spirit in South Africa, where in great crisis comes great opportunity as well. And we see that in the Kasi economy. You know, G.G. Alcock, the economist, puts the informal sector, the food sector, at 89 billion rand in South Africa. Of course, you know, we want to see that money going into the economy, but it also is so encouraging to see the gogo who sells 6,000 Wiener at the taxi rank for R1 each, who's making 30 grand a month, who's entrepreneurial but wakes up at 1 o'clock in the morning to make sure that it happens. And there's an incredible story of a comedian who couldn't find any work during lockdown. He started selling sour porridge in bottles at the Noord Street taxi rank. And those are just great stories in South Africa of entrepreneurship and people who have got this can-do attitude and make things happen. And that, for me, is so encouraging because it does change the narrative in that person's world, but also around them as well. And we've spoken about how we can't rely on government to do everything for us, right? I think everyone's reached that point. People speak about a tax revolt, which I don't think is the answer at all. But certainly public-private partnerships are extremely fruitful in many ways. And we are starting to see this more and more where private entities, obviously, we saw it with vaccination rollouts, where so many corporates got on board. And we're seeing this more and more in terms of how can we help government. So when I say we have to do things ourselves, it doesn't mean that we need to just let government flounder. We still need to find a way to better improve the situation, like with the pothole patrol. We have blue fire trucks in Joburg. So these things are happening where we are seeing more and more public-private partnerships as well. So I appreciate the fact that there is still a negative narrative of South Africa, but slowly we are starting to see things turn. At the various state-owned entities, we've seen a change in leadership since Ramaphosa came into power. At Kisvita, at SARS, there's been a clear turnaround there with the amount of revenue that has been collected. It's been a real contribution to the fiscus. At the NPA, as I said, I'm starting to see a change with Shamila Batoy and the investigating directorate. I appreciate the concerns around load shedding as well, but there was a time when Eskom was paying 26 Rand for a single-ply roll of toilet paper. That really happened during the Zuma era, where Eskom was paying 26 Rand for a roll of toilet paper that actually cost 4 Rand at Macro. So we are starting to see the clean-out happening, but state capture is still there. We're still seeing the remnants of it. There is still sabotage at Eskom. There is still a fight-back campaign. So all of this takes time, and you have to be patient, but also we can't just sit around and wait and hope that it will happen, right? Because South Africa is that place where we despair one day and we hope the next day. And it can infuriate us, but if we just sit back and think, well, we are on a slippery slope, everything is negative, everything is broken, no one is doing their jobs properly, we are going to despair. So we have to ensure that we contribute as well, and that we make a difference through our organizations, in our own circles, in our own lives, in any way we can, because if you don't want to be here, and you can afford to, and you have the resources, awesome, then go. That's great. But if you're going to stay here and you can, then make a difference. And we see this all the time. There are phenomenal South Africans who are making a difference in their worlds with feeding schemes and outreach programs and all sorts of things happening around us that we don't have time to do necessarily. So what can you do? There are a lot of things that you can do. Firstly, start off by joining a civil society organization and find the one that is right for you. You might have a skill that you can offer. You can set up a debit order that goes off to OUTA every week, or to KSAC or the Helen Suzman Foundation. You can get active. You can offer your skills. You can do something. Get hold of your local councillor. Vote in elections. The fact that we had like a 56% apathy rate during the elections last year is madness. So you have to get young people in your lives to register to vote and actually go out and vote. And find the politician that best meets your criteria. You can stand as a politician. You can be a local councillor, but give a damn. Get in touch with the media, tweet if you have to, phone your radio station, but actually care. Because if you're apathetic, then that is the end for you. And we are going to be on a crazy ride in South Africa for the next year. We are going into an ANC election conference at the end of this year, which means the whole world gets mixed up. The whole politics of South Africa, like everyone just throws a whole lot of mud into it, and we've got to try and survive it. So we're going to see more pala dollars in the couch coming out, more scandals. It's going to be crazy, And then, of course, we're going into an election year next year, and I think it's going to be critical because for the first time, we may see the ANC not coming in as a majority. So we're in for an exciting time. Hold on to your seats, but stick around and make a difference because this country absolutely is worth fighting for. Thank you so much.